Hello, thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Alan Watkey. I'm the Director of Events here at Politics and Prose. And before we get going, we're excited to partner with Faulkner on this event. So I'm going to bring up Martha and Paule to come up and say a few words, and then we'll get going after that.
Thank you, Alan. Actually, I see at least 3 Faulkner board members here, Toni Morrison and Martha. I'm Martha Toll. I'm on the board of directors of Faulkner, and the mission of our organization is to build communities of writers and focus on fiction only. Celebrate the works of writers through awards and programs in schools and other events throughout the year. There are cards on the table and also a cashier finding. You can find out all about our events. Some of them are virtual, some of them are in person. We'd love to have you join us. And the reason we're here tonight is to give an annual short story award for excellence in body of work, the Penn Malin Award, and Edwidge Danticat is our 2023 winner, and we're incredibly excited to sponsor this. So enjoy, and I know that you'll love both Edwidge and Gabriel. Thank you.
All right, so tonight we are very, very excited to welcome Edwidge Danticat, celebrating the release of her essay collection, We're Alone. Danticat is the author of several books, including Rep. I's Memory and Oprah's Book Club Selection, Crep, the National Book Award finalist, The Farmer of Bones, an American Book Award winner, and the novel and stories of Dewbreaker. She's also the editor of The Butterfly's Way, The Beacon Best of 2000, Haiti Noir 2. So she's edited a lot. She's written a ton. She's also written several books for young adults and children, as well as travel narrative. Her memoir, Brother Undying, was a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award and a 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for autobiography, and she's a 2009 MacArthur Fellow. Danticat will be in conversation with Politics and Prose very own Director of Marketing, Lori Edim. She's the founder of Well-Read Black Girl, a book club and digital platform that celebrates the uniqueness of Black literature and sisterhood. She edited on Girlhood 15 stories from the Well-Read Black Girl Library, as well as the Well-Read Black Girl Anthology, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award and named the best book of the year by Library Journal. And then if you haven't already, you should pre-order her new memoir. It's Gather Me, a memoir in the praise of the books that saved me, that comes out at the end of the month. And her event is going to be here on October 30th, so be here for that. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Edwidge Danticat and Lori Edim.
Welcome everyone, good evening. We are so honored to have you with us today, Edwidge. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming.
We want to give a special shout out to Pen Faulkner as well for coming and helping us promote the event. We're so excited to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I have so many questions, as you can see on my long list. I'm going to jump right into it. The title of this book is just so provocative. We Are Alone suggests themes of solitude, of isolation. How does the book address different forms of loneliness, whether personal, cultural, or emotional, and did any particular experiences or observations inspire this theme?
Again, thank you all for coming. So when you're working, friends will ask, what are you working on? And I would say I'm working on this essay collection. It's called We're Alone. And my friends, being who they are, would say, oh, immediately to translation to the Creole, which was like, nous, right? It's like, it's like we're not with our ancestors, we're like, it seems kind of like defying certain things that I believe in, that of course we're not alone. But I was thinking of it, of course, as like this idea of no one is coming to save us, but also as readers and writers, and the ways that we're alone together. And this sort of this intimacy in that experience. And it also grows out of this poem that I found in a book that someone gave me, a Haitian poet named Roland Chassagne, who was from Jérémie, who was called The City of Poets. And I remember reading, it was in translation, a woman from Maine had translated it. And I remember reading the English version, and I kept wondering what he had written. And for years I was trying to find this poem, and finally I asked his granddaughter, who happens to be Légie Chassagne from the Arcade Fire, and her father sent me a copy of the poem called Plage. And so that, he also talks about being alone, but like in a way that it's sort of beautiful solitude, in which sometimes, art is created.
Can we invite you to read part of the book and share your work with us?
So I'll read a little bit of that preface. I don't have the loop. We're alone, a preface. I spent many years trying to find the original poem, Plage, from which Roland Chassagne's words were translated. I came across the English translation in the 1934 book given to me in the 1990s by a friend. The book is The Poets of Haiti, 1782-1934, and the translator is an American woman named Edna Worthley Underwood. Underwood was born in Maine in 1873. I don't know how she ended up in Haiti during the latter end of the 1915-1934 U.S. occupation, but she had friends in high places, including Haitian President Samuel Vincent, who wrote her book's introduction. Readers will find in the Poets of Haiti the echo of all great human emotions, Vincent declared. Some of the poems in the collection felt intimate, particularly those by the Jérémie-born poet Roland Chassagne, whose words read like secrets. Laisse-moi prendre tes mains et te dire des choses simples et inoubliables. Lorsque nous étions seuls près du rivage, sous ce daïs de palme, et qu'on s'aimait, le bonheur était immense et inexprimable. Allow me to take you by the hand and tell you some simple things, some simple and unforgettable things. Because we were alone near the shore, under this canopy of palms, and we loved each other, the pleasure was intense and indescribable. In April 1963, during the Duvalier dictatorship, Roland Chassagne was arrested at Port-au-Prince Deschamps printing house, where he worked as a proofreader. He was accused of being in possession of, quote, contraband literature. He was taken to Papa Dog Duvalier's prison dungeon for Dimanche and was never heard from again. Roland Chassagne's name eventually appeared on a 1978 Inter-American Commission on Human Rights list of political prisoners who had died from malnutrition at Fort Dimanche. Still, Roland Chassagne's words remain, both in the original and in somewhat interpretive translations. Writers may die, but not their canopy of language, just as Roland Chassagne still sometimes whispers to me, dear reader, please allow me to reach for your hand. We're alone.
Reading the preface and themes taken by that poem and that opening, it's just an invitation to the reader to understand your philosophy and how you seek out the word. The fact that you have this book and you were committed to finding the original work and the granddaughter and having the son, it also feels that the universe is pulling everything together. my question is for you is your work often delves into the complexities of the Haitian diaspora. How does We Are Alone continue to explore the connection between homeland and identity, and particularly for those living in exile or separated from their roots?
I mean, essays and the other thing that I talk about in the preface is this idea of essays as the anthropologist artist Jeanette, I think in English calls it rassemblage, and rassemblage is, as she defines it, is this taking fragments of ideas, fragments of words, spirits, and recollecting them. It's kind of like Toni Morrison's idea of rememory, right? It's not assemblage, which is something else, but like rassemblage, like reassembly. And I think that's in part what we do as people in the diaspora, as immigrants, kind of recreating a life, recreating ourselves. And language is part of that, like I'm speaking to you in a language that is not mine, but that is part of, we acquire, like, my mom used to say, we might be born speaking in one language and die speaking another, and that's part of this long journey of this rassemblage. So I see this as a continuation in the sense that it's ideas that I keep exploring, and I even go back, like in the first chapter, to the story Children of the Sea, because I was at a gathering of young writers in a place in Haiti called Founet Blanc, and someone had assigned them to read that story in Creole, and they kept asking me all the questions young writers ask: how do you begin, how do you end a story, and that whole essay is kind of revisiting Children of the Sea, but in a sort of with the framing of not just as the writer of it, but just as someone who's watching other people read it.
Yeah, I'm really taken by the sense that you just said that your mother said you might be born speaking one language and die speaking another. When we think about family dynamics and that, throughout, anyone reads your whole body of work, I feel like that always is running so deep in your narratives, How do you feel like this book sits when it comes to intergenerational relationships? And how do the experiences of older generations shape the lives of the younger characters? Or in your case, of your younger family members as well?
I mean, I'm 55 now, and I'm at this point in my life where I'm always meeting young people who are like, my grandmother loves your books. And I'm like, you don't mean your mother? Don't push me so far back. And then they will say things like, oh, your books help me understand my parents. And so I do feel like, this is the first time too that I'm writing in nonfiction so much about my daughters, or like young adults.
I was thinking about the essays when they go back home, and
yeah, and so I do feel like I'm treading that generational line, because also for me, like the generation that preceded me, my parents are no longer with me, and so you feel like when you lose your parents, it's kind of like that tear is removed, and now it's you. And my uncle, who was the last person on my father's side, like the last of my father's siblings who was alive, I write about him in the book, like his passing. So you just feel like you're getting bumped in the generations, and I've always seen part of what I do as a work of documentation, even for my children. And so there's definitely the progression and a desire to address like current things in their lives, in my life, and all our lives together. Also because we've always lived, for my children's entire life, they've always lived in like what we call here a multi-generational house, so they don't be like a grandma with us. So they've always had that, the orality of that, but also to have it on the text is important for me as a project.
Another theme in many of your novels is the experiences of women navigating personal and political turmoil. How did the female protagonists in We Are Alone evolve from characters like Claire in Sea of Light, or Annabelle in Farming the Bones? Is there a new dimension to how you explore womanhood and survival?
I mean, and these are, I mean, fiction, I've always thought like, another way we can think about that is in a way of difference between fiction and nonfiction. And nonfiction always feels to me urgent, no matter when you're like, it's something you want to say now, it's something you want to share now. With fiction, you have to ponder and you have to create people out of like the ideas that you haven't, and that often takes a longer period of time. So for Claire of the Sea Light, I remember I started writing the piece that opens it after I watched this documentary with these people who adopt children from Haiti, and one of them was saying, well, they don't think about parenting like we do, And this person was now the parent of like a Haitian child in somewhere like in the middle of the country, right? And I thought, wow, and that's how Claire came about. But it took a while to figure out how to put that in a story and how to, because if you process whatever rage like in a story, it's not a story, it's kind of like a treatise, right? And so like to make those differences, but I'm interested in ways too that individuals kind of pop out of that history. And in diaspora for us, especially if you live in a house with an elder, a lot of that comes through YouTube, right? Like Haitian YouTube. So there are people who are like characters in these essays. For example, this woman who's declares herself a prophetess, who had announced the president's assassination, which ended up happening. She went all over in media trying to tell people. So there are individuals who are real people, but you're like, this, if I made up this person in the novel, everybody would be like, nah, that doesn't make sense. But human beings are like that. We're very layered and complex.
Yes, layered and complex. And I feel like this story, this nonfiction collection is so layered and complex. And there seems to be levels of joy, but also personal reflection on grief and loss. I guess my question is, how do the emotional stakes differ from like fiction work? Does it, you just mentioned it's urgent. Does it feel like you are urgently trying to get it out, or is there a message you're trying to really have the reader, we were just talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates as the message, is there something particular that you want to really impress upon the reader?
Well, I think it allows, like nonfiction, especially essays, allows you this opportunity to directly address the reader. So when even this idea of being alone, you're alone with the reader. And when I read people's essays that are very revealing, very vulnerable, I always like oddly have this feeling of like, they trust me, because they're telling me their deepest and darkest secrets. And so I think you get to be with the reader in a more, even the I, right, like addressing, you get to be with the reader in a different way, in a more intimate way, if you will. And they know there's no veil. Fiction is sometimes my veil. And with the nonfiction, there's no veil. You're directly speaking to people. They assume that what you're saying is true, or that something that you're telling them you imagine is true. And so there's a greater intimacy there. And and in a collection, it's a kind of woven trust. And when I was going back to like the assemblage, I was also, when I was putting these essays together, I started hearing more, you write a lot of nonfiction about this idea called the braided essay, which is an essay that has these different, themes that are weaving through, and eventually they come together. And I feel like a lot of the essays in this book are braided essays, in that you start in one place and then sort of weave your way. I mean, there's, my daughter Mira was taking a course during 2020. I was one of those parents who are like, stay busy every second, even though you have no place to go. And she was taking this course, and I, by a writer in America, and Carnival, who's a wonderful essayist, and she talks about the essay as a body of water. And her challenge to the writer in the essay, she's like, will you stand on shore or will you go into this water? So there's a lot of water in this book, including this photograph.
Yeah, can you talk about this beautiful cover? Like, tell us what inspired that, who's the artist?
So the photographers, again, I was also keeping very busy in 2020. So I was asked to write about this wonderful photographer named Edim, who's Haitian American, and she was doing these photographs that are posed, some in the park during COVID, and I remember coming across this image, and there's so much water in the book, from Erica's notion to also just to hurricanes to travel through water, through our first great, our first forced migration across water. And then thought, oh my gosh, if I ever, I'm gonna put this on the cover of these essays when I finally get it together. And thankfully she allowed me to. But it has all these things like, so you have the water, but then we call this toy, which is like this metal here, which is usually roof metal, tin, and all these like photographs within photographs. It just seemed like really perfect for the cover.
It's so beautiful. You just mentioned the bodies of water and that being like woven in through various essays. Can you talk more about how setting is so crucial to your storytelling, and talk more about the locations, whether physical or metaphorical, how they can help shape the emotional narrative of the
Yeah, I wanted folks to feel like they were traveling with me through the collection, and a lot of that travel is through memory, through water also, because it opens with that writers' workshop in Fournier-Blanc in 2018, where we spent this wonderful week in this beautiful library with young people, who were dancers, writers, artists, and then it just so happens we're in Haiti, like doing like the biggest breakout of a protest that day, and where there was a soccer match, and then the president wrote, like the government then raised prices on gasoline, and then we had to figure out how to get from where we were in the country. And so it's just that travel, and then there's a lot also about hurricanes, because I lived in Florida the last 20-some years, and God bless everybody in the path of Milton right now. I know that feeling. And so I wanted to also talk about that, and just so we travel. It's the settings are also places that I'm not fully at always, and sometimes when I write about a place where I don't live, it's a way for me to also remember certain things, remember certain moments, like almost mark it on my soul in a way.
beautiful. I want to delve into how you communicate. I love when you go back and forth in French. I just love it in your essays. Language can also be a bridge, it could be a barrier, and we're alone. How did you continue to use language to express emotions that were grappling with solitude, and allow just for a more expansive purview for the reader, especially if one maybe unfamiliar with French or Haitian culture, you still invite them in such a beautiful way.
Well, thank you. So it's more like, aside from the Chassagne, and back then everybody, the writers, back in the 30s, they mostly wrote in French. The rest of it's mostly Haitian Creole, and even in the fiction, there's always, of course, I'm writing about even when I'm quoting someone, it's clearly they were speaking Creole, and I'm kind of a translator of what they were saying, and it's, for me, it's always, there's always a process of simultaneous translation, And I'm always also super aware of of the Haitian American or the Haitian reader who read this. And I want to often offer not the a literal translation for them, because they would have already understood what was said, or the nuances, or the proverbs, but to offer also at the same time, and I try to do it in the fiction too, another version, so that they read two things, not one thing, and a particular segment like that.
Well, sometimes when you're going back and forth in language, like if you say something in Creole and has a different meaning or head weight to it versus when you translate it into English, did you find that happening too with certain words or certain experiences that you're trying to translate that it didn't have the same weight to it?
Oh, all the time. I mean, I've been thinking a lot, for example, of this expression, because of all the the water that I'm talking about this book and the water, and also thinking about water, sea surge, and expressions like, for example, that then gain a whole other cultural level, because someone who was in power said them, and then they're just they could have been just an ordinary saying, but because they were saying in political speech, just take on a whole other meaning. Things like, nager pour sauter, swim to get out, right? And that's speaking to the impossibility of a situation. It's like a dare, I dare you, or proverbs like behind the mountain, or it just depends on who's saying it and in what context. And in the power too, the Creole it's a beautiful language it's a very visual language, but it also has the power of gesture, the power in that so it's something that I often try to capture in both the fiction and nonfiction, because people can be, and in the nonfiction, when you're doing a kind of reportage, you realize that people could be saying one thing, but their body is saying something else. Yeah. And that's in every kind of situation, but I find it particularly interesting in a situation that you're not in all the time.
There's a different context if you have a certain movement, or it's said a certain way, or another inflection, I also want to talk about political landscapes. With all your books, I'm such a huge fan. I love your work so much. Again, it's such an honor to be in conversation with you. But I do draw some inspiration to be more vocal when it comes to voicing my opinion, to share my ideas in a way that captures the attention. Your essays always capture the attention of the reader. And I was really taken by the way you describe your relationship with Toni Morrison, or Gloria Hinsberry, James Baldwin. These really incredible people that I feel like you align right next to them. The books on my shelf honor them as they honor you. Can you talk about why you chose to really talk about their legacies and your experience as a young person in this collection, reading their work for the first time, and how it motivated you to be the writer you are today?
Thank you for that. So, I mean, in a way, in this continued journey, and Create Dangerously, I went back to the writers of Haiti who, the really political writers, some of whom were sacrificed, like Jacques who was murdered returning to Haiti, and Marie Chauvin, who died in the U.S., but had written these very powerful novels that she couldn't publish because her family was threatened if the novel comes out. So that I wanted to honor in that book that legacy of my life, and then and I think this one moves more towards coming to the U.S. and the books that I started reading. This is not in this, but I remember coming at 12, and my dad took me to the Brooklyn Public Library, and back then you could borrow 10 books, and I always had my 10 books, and they had a very narrow shelf back then, you guys see it was Haitian novels. And when I was done reading all those, I started reading my Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings with the dictionary, and had I not, I don't think I would have had the courage to write Red Bat's Memory if I hadn't read that book, because the level of revelation in it was so deep. Like I just didn't like. And then when I met her in person, I was like, oh my gosh, she's glorious. Like, and there was just so it felt to me in my young mind that how like the way she was glowing had a lot to do with the fact that she had shed that stuff that was in the book. So I don't know how I made that connection. I was like, writing can liberate you. Like, look what it says for Maya Angelou, who's like a queen, right? And so, but I was really awed by that level of revelation because we grew up during the dictatorship. My parents were very, like, we couldn't tell anybody your business. Like, so, and then to read all that, like, that level of revelation in the book was so powerful. And I started reading, African American literature. My high school teacher, Mr. Casey, gave me Mary Evans' book of Black women writers. And that's when I started reading Toni Morrison, like excerpts, Toni Morrison and Nikki Giovanni. And then, Zora Neale Hurston, those excerpts led me to the actual books. And Paule Marshall, I think, was a very powerful bridge for me because Paule Marshall, writers like Paule Marshall, Audre Lorde, and June Jordan, who had Caribbean heritage, I felt like, oh, it's been done, right? Like, it's possible.
My memoir is coming out at the end of this month.
Come back for her event.
And I completely agree with you. The level of revelation with Maya Angelou is what also inspired me to be as candid and as open, as transparent as possible. Because when you read their books, especially with Maya Angelou, it's like not only do you see yourself visible, but then you can see yourself vibrant as well.
Yes.
Like there's a shining that happens, and like you just feel like I can do this too. And it almost gives you permission that like this beautiful woman who has gone through so much, been so honest about her life, like there's something beautiful on the other side awaits you when you do that.
I mean, it's interesting that you say the other side because I always say, I sometimes when you teach, the students will say, I can't write this because my mom will be mad, or I can't write this, and I'm always telling them, even if you write it and you don't share it, but what you're not writing is keeping you from writing what's beyond it, right? Like from finding out what's beyond that thing that you're not writing. So it was for me, it's a powerful model to see like these survivor women and who were able to do, and also like and again with the word surviving, like for example with the Haitian writer My Initial Hit, it took a long time, but finally the book is now in a modern library edition, a beautiful translation. So the work finds its way.
I'm just so excited to hear you say that. I recently went to a retreat, and one of the instructors was saying, if you had a board on two sides, and one side was like shame and fear, and the other side was like happiness and pride, and you think about the lessons of your life, like where does that energy usually come from? It's like if you're able to talk about the shame and fear, that's where typically the lessons kind of evolve, and you can just be brave enough to address them and write about them. So, just sharing that because you can for students too. So I do want to talk about the resilience when it comes to overcoming challenges in your own life, or when you're, unearthing these incredible writers that maybe didn't have the same recognition or visibility because of a number of reasons. Can you talk to us about what you hope readers will take away about human capacity to endure and survive situations, and how, as you say, the language survives despite what happens, whether it's war or something that separates family migration? How do these things survive in the way that are still beautiful, able for people to access them?
I mean, sadly, for us Haitians, resilience became this really strangely terrible word because it was kind of assigned to us during the earthquake, and it started to kind of mean this thing that you're just like able to just bear everything, right? Because of sort of like you're used to it in a way. And so, one of the things and it's something we talk about between us, and which is like as a parent, right? You know that's what you try to build into your children. You want them to be resilient. But one of the essays I try to grapple with that notion as assigned to us, and then I started thinking of this plant that ouzo, that we sometimes refer to ourselves as, like, and I was also attached to that notion. There's a beautiful song, and I started tackling more towards ouzo than resilient. I've had that conversation with so many friends, including artist friends, and what that means when resilience is self-determined or self-described as opposed to assigned from the outside.
So what is the difference between, like, when do you want to claim resilience and when do you want to rebuke it or push against it?
Well, I mean, it often comes in times when people want you to bear more burdens, right? When they're sometimes, I think one person can use it, but asking like millions of people to be resilient is a lot. It's a lot to ask of them. So I like ouzo because it comes out of the culture. It comes out of sort of self-assigned. So that's I'm not asking people to go out there and say you're ouzo, but I've always been, to me that's like always been one other, like a complement or an alternative to this kind of outside assigned notion of resilience. It's kind of like, the whole Black woman are strong, that whole thing. It's a similar.
And I know you mentioned earlier that it's a sort of a braided essay, but I was when I was reading, I was skipping around a lot. Like I didn't necessarily read from beginning to end. Can you tell us what essay you started with? I have like that idea, but I would love to know like which one you started with and how you decided to structure the collection.
Well, I started with The Children of the Sea because I wanted to start in 2018 and end in 2018. And so the collection the essay that starts the collection is called Children of the Sea, and the one that ends it is called Writing the Self and Others. And that is the most recent essay. It's about my uncle passing away, and my uncle, my mother used to always say, "Don't write about me," and then I still write about her. And my uncle used to say, "Why don't you write about me?" And I used to say, "Are you sure? I don't write happy things." And then he said, "Write about me after I die." And so I just happened to be there actually the moment he passed away, and I wrote about that. And so there's that circularity of like being in Haiti in like July 2018, which became a kind of a monumental date, and what followed. And then, and at the same time, my uncle was becoming sick in New York. He was the last of my father's siblings. So for me, that makes the kind of circularity. But the essays, again, it's a rassemblage. It's a kind of reassemblies of different pieces that are expanded on, and some that are blended. And that's, you've done this, so you know when you're putting, whether it's a short story collection or an essay collection together, you kind of look at what you have. And of course, not everything is going to stand up to time. And but eventually, you want the pieces to be in conversation with one another. You want it to flow. You want it to be a journey.
You mentioned the last essay, which I thought was so powerful. And it made, as I was reading it, I couldn't help but think of Brother, I'm Dying, and other collections you've written that address grief and loss. In particular, there was a small, I'm not remembering the name of it, but it was just on grief. Do you recall that? It was a small book that you wrote that's...
Oh, The Art of Death?
The Art of Death, thank you. And so I found myself revisiting those collections. It's the artist in particular when I lost my father, and when that last essay too was just so beautifully done. How do you have just the preciseness and the courage to discuss death in such a profound way that allows us to it feels very visceral, like how you describe it, how you talk about the connections you have with your family, and how does it feel for you writing? I always wonder, like, do you feel depleted afterwards? Does it feel like a release? Because it's such, grief is so hard, but you're able to do it in a very elegant way.
Thank you. I mean, I think this goes back to, you know, when I was growing up in Haiti, from the time I was born to the time I was 12, my uncle was a minister, and from the time I was very young, we would attend people's funerals that he presided over. And I think that proximity to death it was always clear to me that we are a body, and then there's more on some other side, right? Like whatever your belief system, that this is not all that there is, right? To me, that I was kind of imprinted in me. So grief, in a way, and you know, it's was always to me part of life, and having, you know, I was with my mother when she passed, and I was with my uncle when she passed, and I had the honor of, like, when my aunt who raised me, when she passed away in Haiti, and we went to the funeral home, and because we knew the funeral home owner, and they asked, like, if we wanted to dress her, and that was such a beautiful thing. And I think that proximity to death and seeing somebody you love at the moment that they're making their transition, it's such a powerful thing that it just kind of changes the whole way you see your life, and it's something that I think art is perhaps the closest thing I have to expressing it, this writing, but it's kind of like you leaned over to that other side in a moment before that door shuts, when you're with someone when they're making their transition. It's such a powerful gift that I feel like my mother gave me, to have. When we were talking as she was dying, there was a point, and I read about this in Word, there was a point where when I would shut down the conversation, we couldn't talk about it. But once we were able to say, like, when she said, when I'm gone, I'd be like, no, you're not, you're gonna be okay. But once I stopped saying that, we had the most beautiful conversations. And I was able to, in a way, I feel like, in a way that art does too, kind of peek a little bit behind that veil, whatever it is, to get a sense of whatever her journey was going to be. So there's so many parallels with that, with art, with writing, and with being sort of embodied, and trying to explain really things that are hard to explain, but you keep carving at your words, or if you're a sculptor, you're carving at the wood, or whatever it is, until that thing, or some sliver of it emerges.
When you were writing this, were there other books that were reference points, or even art that helped you formulate the inspiration behind this? Oftentimes some writers say, I don't read anything else, I'm just like focused on the work. I'm just really curious about your inspirations, because they seem so fast, and there's like so much beauty in your work. That is it all coming from your mind, or do you see things in the world that really give you just more clarity to refine your own vision?
It's from that great oil of the universe, I think, from the stories I was told when I was a kid. I remember there was a story I was often told about a young girl whose father died, and then someone an elder goes to the land of the dead to talk to the father and to reassure her. And when my father died, I was like, oh, that's why I was told that story. And also just, I read a lot of books that are, when I'm writing a book, I try to read books that are similar. So for example, I always think my books have godparents. So Brother I'm Dying, it was My Brother by Jamaica Kincaid. about her brother, and Paule Marshall's book about his father. Those two books I was sort of reading all the time because I was trying to figure out, how to craft a story about something that I know and everybody in my family knows, but to try to tell it in a way that people can read it 10, 20 years after it's happened and still feel that. So that's always what I want my work to do, that, especially essays, which can kind of lose their timelessness, but to still feel like, oh, I can read this in 5 years and it still makes sense.
We're going to open it up to questions in a second. If you have a question, please raise your hand and us will come around with a mic to share. I have 2 more questions, so just get yourself ready. I would really like to talk about just more about cultural displacement and the desire to belong. Some of the stories, or the essays, we examine the concept of home and searching for belonging, especially when you are, I don't want to say straddling multiple identities, but like connecting with dualities of because you live in the US, but you're also of Asian descent. Feel like it's not descent for me. You know what I mean? Like there's all these identities. You're also an academic, you're also a writer, you're an artist. Like how do all these things show up in your work? And particularly with this collection, I just felt like it felt different from Create Dangerously. Because you're talking about the same things in Create Dangerously, but the way you position them and how pointed you are is different. So, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. I think as also the older you get, the more pointed the work does get. And I don't want to sort of belabor this thing of mortality, but there is this feeling of also of not wanting to repeat yourself, and then just trying to make sense of the world in a different way, And so when I wrote Breath Eyes Memory, I wrote it from like when I was working on it since I was 18. It was published when I was 25, and so that's very different than. And I look back sometimes. I think as a mother. And someone who's lost their mother, I would not have written that death scene, like the mother so casually death scene. And so there's like that cycling back and with experience, right? It's like a sharper eye, like more lived. I do think one changes so much when you lose your parents, right? And then to see your children on their way to becoming adults, you're like, thank God I kept them alive. And all of that, encompasses too.
How do you feel like you have evolved as a writer? Is there, there's a multitude of ways, but given the book you just referenced now, what do you think is like the biggest thing that has changed about your writing and how you approach the world?
I think I'm more patient, with my writing. I take more time with my characters. I remember going to a workshop once with George Lamming, the great Caribbean writer and thinker, and George Lamming, read a piece of mine, and actually one of the beginnings of a piece in Crack, and he was like, slow down, trust the reader. I think I slowed down more, sort of like from Quick Crack to Everything Inside. Again, revisiting the short story in a different way. I probably trust the reader more, in the sense that which is probably ill-advised because people's attention spans have also gotten less, but to this idea of okay, they'll take their time, I'll take my time, and we'll meet in the middle.
I'm convinced books, like the bookstore and the theater are the last places like people can truly pay attention. Because you have to sit still, you have to like focus on the words, you can't skip through, you can't scroll through a book. You have to really like sit and listen to a story. And if you don't understand, go back to it, and go back to it, so you have like a full recognition. So I love that. I love English.
Yeah, it's like my colleague, Farah Jasmine Griffin, her title of the book is "Read Until You Understand." Yeah.
That is like the mantra to like read and like listen deeply in a way. And I really feel that in your books, like the deep listening and intentionality and just the love that you have for yourself, for Haiti, for the reader. It's very apparent. And I mean, I've said this so many times, but I'm so grateful to have you in community and to talk to you and being able to constantly just like study your work too. But was there anything that was left on the floor of the editor? Was there like secrets that you would have put in or other essays that didn't make it into this collection? I'm always curious.
Yeah, there are always essays that don't quite make it, either because like they're covered in some other way. But the essay again is a form that I love. It's my go-to form. Not even in like opinion pieces or stuff like more that I try to use its devices in. So there'll always be more.
Yeah. Tell us what's left on the floor. What's left?
Well, I have this essay called Roulette de Lula that sort of circulates on the internet, and I've always I wanted to put it in, but it's from like 1994, and I didn't see where it would fit, and I didn't want to like revisit and expand it. So that's one of the, I have like shorter, it's actually about a very precise moment in the 1990s during the coup d'etat, and then when I was a student at Brown and was volunteering with families who had just come to Rhode Island, and some of my conversation with some of the children about their travel at sea. But it's so like fragmented in a way that, and then also I have another piece called Legend that's in the same way that it's like a prose poem. So we put them in, took them out, put them in. It's like, oh, maybe one day they'll exist. Like those types of pieces will be in something else by themselves.
Our archive, visiting. Okay, so we're gonna open it up for questions. I have a mic here. Please raise your hand high. Wonderful.
Hello, it's an honor to be here. My name is Julianne. I'm from Brazil, so forgive my English. I'd like to ask you about your relationship with language. So as growing, speaking Haitian Creole like me, and having learned formally French, and coming to the U.S., and after 8 years, I have read that you acquired the language in such a way that you began writing. So I'd like to ask, was it a choice to write in English? Why not in French? So how do you deal with language being a diaspora daughter?
Thank you. And I love Brazil. I've been to Bahia, Salvador, and I hope to get back. I didn't see my writing in English so much as a choice. So when I came to the U.S. at 12, I spoke Creole, but had been taught in French. But we didn't. Some Haitian families speak French at home, but we did speak French at home. So I felt like I was speaking a language back then that I didn't write, and I was writing a language French that I didn't speak. And so English kind of fell like in the middle of that, and it felt a little bit like, oh, I can write now these things that maybe it's even now like when I publish a book, I get very nervous about my family members, like in Haiti sometimes reading it. I'm like, okay, at least there'll be a lull between the time they can read it, and there feels like a little bit of a freedom in that because I'm always afraid of offending them. So this, so it's just kind of the English, that's what I felt like if there's a patient writer, Richard Doucet, who grew up in Spain. I thought if like Michelin, I had gone to Spain, I probably would be writing in Spanish. So just kind of how it felt. And ultimately, it was great when my books were coming out to also be part of this group of writers who were like me, who came as children, who came older, who were into this language. So it didn't feel like so odd, like what I was doing. You want to plug your movie? Okay. After you. Please. No, I want you to tell me where you from. Okay, go ahead. After.
Hi. Yes. So I'm from the Dominican Republic. I was brought here to New York at the age of 14. I tell my students today I did not know how to say no in English when I arrived in this country. Would you say that there is the Edwidge Danticat persona in Creole and the Edwidge Danticat persona in French, and then there's the one in English? And sometimes they do hold hands and speak the same language, sentiment, body expression. Would you say that depending on which language you are speaking or you are speaking, there are snippets of a different view?
That's a very good question. I've never kind of separated myself in that way. I think it's because it was all kind of meshed in. Even in Brooklyn, we were speaking Creole at home. I was still writing letters to my uncle in Haiti back then. Now I would probably start writing letters and not those WhatsApp messages, which we write in Creole, but we wrote those in French, so that was continuing. And in the English, it was all kind of, and sometimes, I had 2 US-born brothers, and my parents made us speak Creole to them. And my mom used to always say this thing, she's like, I know 100 words in English, I'm not gonna waste them on you all. so you better speak Creole. And so that made us we spoke a lot of Creole to each other, and then we went to school and spoke. So it was for me. But I've noticed it in French. So I have a friend Patricia who the book is dedicated to, and I was like, oh, sometimes I notice the fluctuation in the voice and based on the language that you're speaking, and also sometimes it has to do with your level of, all of us who were young, who had to go to doctor's office with our parents. You see how not speaking a language shrinks you in a public setting. And I used to see it in Haiti with my relatives when they went to a bank, and had to speak French. And I would see it with my mother. She had to go to the doctor, and now thankfully they have other people translating and not the children. But when you're translating for your parents, and they're infantilized, and you're learning their biggest secrets that never in any other situation, and you have to pretend you never heard that after you translated it. So I think all those those are these moments where you're different selves. Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
This is my friend Edim. He's a filmmaker. He has a new film out, actually, that starts around the period that is in the open chapter of the book, called The Fight for Haiti. So you can tell the people about your movie and where they can
support you.
Yeah.
The film is about an anti-corruption and community movement in Haiti. I tried to document what happened for the last 6 years, from 2018 and on. And it was important for me because a lot of people Haiti, but they don't really know what's happening on the ground because most people just read about what's going on in the headlines, so it's really hard for people to know what's really going on. So I think this movie will be, it's a way to take people behind the headlines. So we will be playing in this season sometime soon. I don't have a date yet, but if you follow the Fight for Haiti, so you will be able to see the movie.
What's this? Is it a website?
Oh yeah, the Fight for Haiti. It's a website where you can.
Fightforhaiti.com?
TheFightForHaiti.com.
Fightforhaiti.com, you heard it here.
I have a best agent in the world.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying that. Thank you.
We can take one more question. Okay.
Oneri.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so I have a question. It's a bit of a hypothetical question that's going to require you to be self-indulgent. Years ago, I saw you speak at the Zora University Festival. And you spoke about when you first arrived at Barnard, you saw Zora University's book, and you thought, hey, one day I would like my book to be there. All right? You said you just happened to be doing the talk years ago, that thought left your mind. And sure enough, when you looked at the display of books, your books were right alongside Zora University. So you were like, yeah, I did that. So I don't know where I heard this, but they said that the next writer after Toni Morrison with the Nobel Prize for Literature is probably going to be Edwidge Danticat, right? And so I've been teaching your books for years. And so I always lead with that with my students, right? Bob Dylan won it, I was sweating, right? All right, Louise Gluck, oh, she's a poet, essayist, we still good. So no novelist has won it since Toni Morrison. So when you get that call, what is that going to mean to you?
I guess that's why you say self-indulgence. I don't even want to go there. But I guess highly hypothetical, I would say, Haiti, yes! That would be my first thought.
That feels like the perfect way to play with it. We're going to manifest that and put the energy towards that, okay? Thank you so much for joining us here at Politics and Prose. This is truly an absolute honor. Thank you.